Hello and welcome to the third part of the lecture series on the unconscious, on A Tale of Light and Shadow. And today we're going to get into the final part of looking at the unconscious, and that is the post-structural part. That is the part that focuses on language, that looks at the entire entanglements of structure, of logic, and how the unconscious can be understood not as just this sort of mystical dark realm that lies within us, but to be actually something that is outside of us. Just as Jung has said, we are living in the psyche, not the psyche. It is not that the psyche is within us, we are in the psyche. In the same way that authentic being oneself is rested on sincerity. So you can only be yourself authentically if you are sincere towards the community you're in. And if you lack a community, which people increasingly do, achieving that sincerity and that authenticity becomes increasingly difficult. And to conceptualize it even further, one can look at such ideas such as the thoughts of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari when they characterized the unconscious as being the totality of machinic desire, being that sort of libidinal energy that is seeping out into all these technologies we have, into this consumerist web of let's say extraction of our life energy, this sort of cocooning into a kind of pod of consumerism, which is represented by what they refer to as capitalism. It is, of course, questionable to which extent this system can be characterized in such economic terms anymore, as the principles of free market capitalism or socialism are not really represented in the pure form in any way. But one can see the underlying kind of postmodern approach to things, and this is the approach post, let's say, dissolution of metaphysics and the emergence of the systemic cybernetic thought. So what you see is, instead of representations and real metaphysical realities, you get just this enmeshed web of references, signs and references. You get everything refers to some other sign, everything refers to some other thing, and you are just following along this like spreading out web of processes. Herbert Marcuse would have called this the one-dimensional man, but the only adaptation to this one should make is it is not just one linear determinist trajectory, but it is the individual that is entering the prophelicity that Möller talks about. It is entering the dissolution, the kind of individualism, one could say the divisiveness of dividing the individual into all of these different entities to be processed. So as the societal structures had been dissolved by capitalism, arguably, they've been reconstructed, or Deleuze and Guattari would say re-territorialized into this kind of construction of the individual, the construction of the nuclear family, which was only there to be an intermediary stage of the controlled demolition. It was only there to be an intermediary stage to generate more energy to then be dissolved yet again. And this continuous process of re-territorialization, deterritorialization is described in their work titled Anti-Oedipus, and it is something that lies on a general trajectory towards ultimate deterritorialization. So it is a kind of entropic argument of the disorder increasing continuously, and this kind of argument was made by a lot of contemporary, let's say, post-Marxist leftists, where they try to reconcile the fact that that the crisis had happened and yet capitalism wasn't abolished, and often they would say that the reason for that was that a kind of paternalist, authoritarian let's say, barbaric patriarchy was still kind of holding on, was still kind of living within the unconscious that was holding on to the modes of production. So what was necessary was to dissolve even the cultural dynamics that would hold that together. And so the promotion has been increasingly the dissolution, and what cultural dissolution, what Deleuze and Guattari would call schizophrenia, the kind of following the flows of dissociation. So when a patient or a person becomes dissociated and follows very dissociated paths in their thinking due to the information overflow and the lack of coherence in the world, these flows should be followed instead of the kind of alleged reactionary approach of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy to kind of piece them back together into a simulation, into a simulacrum of a constructed identity. And the kind of difference here is that it is still thoroughly thinking within the cybernetic framework, and what it is leaving out is the escape from the system itself. It is leaving out that which doesn't conceal itself. The system cannot systematize anything that is in essence undisclosed, and this is something that is the inversion of the symbol. So the symbol, which in signs and references just is empty and only determined by its reference to something else, becomes this sort of iceberg structure. This iceberg structure which has a sort of appearance in the word, but actually has a meaning that it lies below the surface, which discloses a lot of sense in the world. And the Jungian conception of that is that understanding of the symbol. So the conception of living in this enclosed system that keeps increasing entropy, keeps schizophrenizing the flows, as one could say, leaves out the fact that entropy is not the end goal. Like a system can exhibit emergence, which leads to the transformation of the system as a whole into something entirely other, so that the measure of entropy is reset entirely. So there is this kind of escape, and instead of the understanding of the unconscious as some other spirit realm, some metaphysical thing, one has to see it as a form of structure that is represented in the world around us as well. So it had its origin perhaps in the kind of understanding of night and day, of the world being dark at some point, the world not disclosing at some times, and has transformed past the technological phases into that what we have now, namely that all this sense of disclosure and non-disclosure has been made accessible and processable by the means of technology. Very concretely put, the fact that there's light in this room abolishes the undisclosedness of the darkness, but the darkness is not defeated. The darkness is essential to the world. And this can be further seen in the understanding of the incompleteness theorems of formal logic. So logic, a system or a logical system, necessarily needs to enclose a space. As Buckminster Fuller put it, you need at least 4 points to create the minimal geometric structure, a tetrahedron, to enclose space to create a system. Often logical systems are built up of 4 axioms minimum, so, or 3 axioms of which a 4th one follows. As I said, the quaternity with 3 elements and the departing 4th. And so this system, the incompleteness of a system that Kurt Gödel showed, he showed that every formal system cannot be consistent and complete at the same time. It's either inconsistent or incomplete. And this incompleteness leads to the emergence of these claims, for example, in the formal system, that are either both true and false or neither true nor false, so unprovable. And within this conceptual whole of the system, you can see the negation of the system and the emergence of something new that is fundamentally not formalizable. This notion has been known to the Zen Buddhists as a sort of phenomenological way of arriving at truth, where the so-called koans were formulated that are on their face entirely contradictory, but by letting both of these contradictions stand for themselves, the actual meaning arises from amidst those contradictions. I will continue on this stream of thought in the next video and bring into it the understanding of a system as it was in metaphysics and how that has dissolved.